Hello there, I'm Carolyn Elliott.
And this is Laila Bernard.
And you are listening to the Sleep Over podcast. And Laila and I were just having a lot of fun today. I'm politically excited, I guess, as I rarely am, because apparently the trucker convoy protests, as we predicted for the US Pluto Return, and we knew because people were already talking about doing it, but they are indeed happening, and they are indeed, on their way, or just around the 23rd of February, to Washington, D.C., intending to, I guess, basically blockade it, like snake around it and cut it off, which does indeed seem like a very Pluto return in second house in Capricorn, with the trucks carrying literal physical goods, or usually carrying literal physical goods, and the trucks themselves being very stable second house Capricornian material presences, workhorses. Yeah. And the grievances, as far as I can tell from press releases that I've seen, supposedly from the organizers of this U.S. convoy, do seem to concern the various COVID mandates, and also the general concern about the seeming absence of constitutional freedoms these days. Like, I don't know where our freedom of assembly went. I don't know where the fuck that went. I've been at rainbow gatherings. I've been at, little peaceful anarchist brunches in the park where people are spreading out blankets and having little free sharing. I've seen police all up in these at events that were not protests, that were not anything but people happily gathering together to share things without money. Invaded by the police. So anyways, freedom of assembly, I don't know. And of course, with all the COVID rules about not getting together
in large groups,
whatever, that definitely seems to have gone out the window. As Laila and I have previously discussed, the super creepy censorship on the internet, which of course you can argue those are private companies and they can do whatever they want. And sure, I guess. And also they're the means by which people come to know information these days.
They're the lens, they're the filter.
So those are pretty twisted and not really free speechy at all. And then what other constitutional freedoms do we seem to be lacking? Well, those are the main ones that are really bugging me.
Well, and you were talking about is there a state of emergency declared, or special powers to the president? You were telling me about this, Carolyn?
Yeah. So as far as I understand it, Donald Trump, when the COVID thing first started happening, declared a state of emergency. And I think that time period ran out, because I think it's only for a number of months, 6 months. And please, I don't know, investigate on this, because my understanding is not super complete. And then Biden reinstated the state of emergency. And apparently this condition, gives the executive a lot of powers to do things.
Executive includes police. I feel like that's something that most people don't realize, is that
the executive branch includes the police.
Executive branch is, the police are part of the executive branch of the government, because they are the ones who execute the law.
But aren't the police at the local or state level and not under federal?
But it's still the executive branch of governance is police officers.
Interesting.
Anyway.
Well, we could look more into that. So something to research more, what exactly the Emergency Act does, but at least we know that it expands executive power, sort of disrupts that balance of the branches there. And anyways, and certainly since 9/11, there's been all sorts of surveillance, as the good Edward Snowden showed us. All kinds of crazy surveillance on us. So these big tech companies cooperating, that's, I guess, how they do it, cooperating with the government to get all of our online information.
Yeah, someone recently told me that all the Ring cameras that are sold through Amazon or just Ring in general, which I think is like an Amazon or Google company. I don't know the details because that's just how my brain works. That Ring has contracts with all local police departments so that in the event of a crime going down in your area, they can take footage from the Ring camera that was captured during the time of the crime, and you don't even necessarily know that's happening.
Yes, I've heard that too, which actually, I mean, that corresponds directly to in Orwell's 1984, the TV screens
Teleputer,
watch
yes.
you.
Right.
So that's certainly happening.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I think the thing that's occurring to me as you're talking about all this, Carolyn, is that like whether we agree the means by which it's happening or not, things do seem to just becoming more and more locked down in a certain reality tunnel, and the price of questioning the reality tunnel is like the ante is going up.
The ante is going up, and you know, this is not the funnest reality tunnel. And for the past, I've been hearing many places, again, something, no, research more everything that I say, because God damn it, I'm doing my best to know what's going on by trying to read a whole bunch of articles everywhere. But man, is propaganda high and information sparse on both sides. But so the greatest upward transfer of wealth in history, in recorded history, has happened in the past 2 years, you know, due to all of these people like forced to stay at home. Their local little mom and pop groceries probably don't have delivery services, whatever. We've been ordering
We've all been funneled into the easy techno assisted streams of oligarchical control, and we love it. We're just like loving suckling on the teeth.
It is I do find it very pleasurable to order anything the fuck I want on Amazon, and the day later it's presented to me like I'm an empress.
Yes, let's maintain our non-duality. There is something very beautiful about suckling on the teat of the empire. And yet this empire does seem to be systematically draining us of our ability to have an economy in any way not directly connected to it. And, as evidenced to me by when, I don't think I've told the story before, so I'll just go ahead and tell this story completely a little bit. When I was at the Rainbow Gathering in Tennessee in 2012, having a wonderful time, the climax of the Rainbow Gathering, which if you're not familiar, it's like people travel from all over to come to these gatherings, and at the gatherings there's no money used. So it's been a tradition since the 1970s. It's like a hippie attempt to fulfill a Hopi prophecy about rainbow tribes gathering together. There's people who have these camps, and they make it their life's work to build giant clay and stick ovens to bake pizza every night for thousands of people, and just, to live in the kingdom of heaven.
To live in the kingdom of heaven. And truly, it was the most beautifully mind-altering experience that I ever had. When they greet you, there's squatter punks in the backs of trucks, like making pancakes and giving you pancakes and water and saying, "Welcome home, sister, welcome home, brother," to absolutely everybody who shows up, right? And that's how they talk throughout the whole camp. So there's all these different camps. Like there's a camp that makes popcorn. There's a camp just for kids. There's a camp, the most adorable and pretentious camp called like the Green Way, which completely is like very ascetic and vegan and yogic, where like people stand in line talking about how nuts, eating anything more dense than a nut brings down their consciousness. Anyways, it's adorable. And this, Burning Man is very like electric and techno, but the Rainbow Gathering is like no electricity, usually in locations with plenty of water too.
Right.
Anyway, so the climax of the Rainbow Gathering, this joyous, wholesome, hippie traveler event, is a prayer on the 4th of July. Everybody does their best to maintain silence and
pray for peace around the world. So there I was like 27. I was standing in this prayer circle around an American flag, praying for, peace in the USA and around the world. And in walk 30 dudes in jack boots carrying machine guns to patrol the prayer. It felt like a pretty strong violation of my freedom of assembly and my freedom of religion. And, it was very intimidating and very scary.
Were these cops or were these like militia dudes?
I have no idea who they were. They were not like local militia dudes. I mean, they were definitely, I think they were connected somehow to the National Parks Agency or the Fish and Wildlife or something, which I guess Fish and Wildlife is just like the FBI, has very similar. Anyways, so I guess they were there to make sure that we weren't abusing wildlife or selling drugs or something. But they were fucking terrifying. They were like really, it was a very yin and yang of like the peace and the war vibes. It was, I don't know, maybe
you just called it in.
It in.
Yeah.
But those sorts of experiences, including experiences that I had, my confrontations with police weren't that major at Occupy Pittsburgh, but certainly in the G20 protests that happened in Pittsburgh, the protesting basically a small group of people economically pulling the strings for all of us and giving us the fuzzy end of the lollipop. They brought tanks into my neighborhood. They brought like terrifying helicopters circling my university at all hours. There were peaceful student protests in the lawn of the university. And I remember one night I used to go to this, man, I'm a little bit rambly today, but I used to go to this improv night, this late night improv night. And I wasn't even protesting. I was just like a stuck in the mud graduate student. Anyways, I was walking to this improv comedy night and I guess the protests were on and the cops saw me. And one cop told me to cross the street and go home. So I did. I crossed the street and I turned around and I started heading home. And with my back turned, as I was walking away, she threw a fucking can of tear gas at my head. And so the tear gas canister went off and I ran home. I ran like a mile and a half back to my house, terrified. And I wasn't being belligerent. I wasn't even part of the protest. I was just walking down the street. Anyways, these kinds of experiences have really drove home to me that we do, in fact, live in a police state.
Yes, we sure do.
That we are not a free country. Anyways, all of which is to say that the trucker convoy phenomenon in Canada has been interesting to us, and it does indeed seem for the US Pluto Return. There's a similar thing happening right now in the USA. I guess in Canada, as far as I've heard, the protests have been disbanded because the Prime Minister declared martial law and invoked his Emergencies Act and just arrested the lot of them and shut off the bank accounts of the organizers. And now Canada is talking about wanting to permanently maintain this bank account shutting power. Anyways, crazy town stuff. But in Canada, the protests did succeed to the extent of getting mandates lifted a lot of places. The last time we made a podcast talking about this, somebody that I respect a lot, Samantha Kuttner, I hope I'm pronouncing her name somewhat correctly. She runs the Glitter Pill podcast, and she has been researching for some time now how it is that, neo-Nazi racist groups operate and get more members like the Proud Boys. And anyways, something that came to my attention through her genius was that perhaps there are some unanswered questions about the political motivations or whatever of the people in the trucker convoy. And, there's been reports of Nazi flags having been seen and Confederate flags having been seen. And that certainly is sad and disturbing. But I guess just what jumps to my mind when I hear that is that, well, yeah, for like, and a few things make sense to me. Tragic sense, which is that people motivated to protest in such a way that they're like leaving their livelihoods for at least weeks at a time, and they're out in fucking Canada in February. These are people really disenchanted, perhaps really on the fringes. Mm-hmm. Perhaps they've fallen prey to these like pernicious, evil ideologies. Not making excuses, but just saying very likely that these people have been very traumatized in their lives, abusive families, not great schools, and vulnerable to twisted stuff. So what I'm saying is like there's a portion of people with really screwy ideologies in any protest, especially in any really intense protest, because the people who are desperate enough to do that shit, who aren't comfy on their couches with their Netflix and their good jobs and whatever, are a bit damaged. Some of them, yeah.
Are the same people who are targeted and, susceptible to that kind of simple answer to difficult questions.
Yes. And so I feel that at every protest that I've been at, I've encountered people with, these views that I would consider abhorrent. And there are also people suffering and trying to, it's an intense thing and not condoning any of that. But I'm just saying, my gut feeling is that is not what the protests are about. Like, my gut feeling is that the protests are genuinely about what they say they're about, which is protecting constitutional, foundational freedoms. And sadly, that can attract people with like very screwy ideas of freedom. But I saw a press release. I'm going to try to link to it in the Anchor description. It's not easy because we're editing it on our phones and I'm an elder millennial and not good at that. But I've seen press releases from people who say that they're organizers of the US Convoy, who seemed very sincere that the protests are made up of people of all races and backgrounds, not trying to hate against any of them, and truly just concerned with standing up for what is right and good and true. And maybe I'm a dope, maybe I've got it all wrong, but something about what they're doing just like really resonates with my soul and turns me on, and I feel a brightness in it.
Well, I think my guess is that you just love the insurrectionary joy of it on some level, and you are kind of a natural revolutionary, always wanting to like further the evolution of things. And so this kind of like confrontation and uprising just like thrills you in your spirit.
Thank you, Layla. I guess it does. I do find it thrilling. And we also have a video I'm going to put in the description, a picture of the convoy that's in Montana right now. And it is huge. It looks like a lot of trucks. And it's just like, well, it's really happening.
It's inspiring.
Yeah.
It's like, we were talking about, thelema and the accomplishment of the true will. Mm-hmm. And there is just something very moving and magical about a bunch of people putting their money where their mouth is, and their like a livelihood and time and actual will and effort and like manifest capacity into sticking up for what they believe in. And like you say, I also agree that like, no matter how we might like to slice it for, the good of keeping people divided against one another along race lines instead of class lines, like I agree with you that the intent of the convoys does not seem to be primarily some kind of like evil racist takeover. It really does seem to be about like, we need to have choices. We need to be allowed to like have bodily autonomy, like livelihood autonomy. We can't just be like rats in a cage in this economy. That's not right. That something feels wrong about that. And they're like acting on that. And that is very like inspiring and beautiful and like, oh, I think to be celebrated, because if we all took that kind of responsibility for enacting our will, then if we find something objectionable, we too have the capacity to act against it. You know, I mean, that's...
Yes, absolutely. So I guess the main thing to say is I think Laila and I are just interested to see what happens when they get to DC. Like, whoa, I mean,
I feel just excited. Yeah, astrologically, here we are as like the Pluto return of the US happens, and what kind of transformation will come down. I mean, I think it's interesting to think about how on like one level, I think part of the fear of these kinds of protests are like, do not make a ruckus. You are only going to make things worse. You're only going to make it worse. And that kind of impulse is just very sad. I don't know.
yeah, it is. I mean, it's like the coward's wussy pants impulse, and
it's what happens to you after you've been colonized. Like after you know what awful things can happen to you, you just start to live a mental game of like how to keep awful things from happening. You just live in the cage of like not touching the electric fence.
Yeah, indeed, and we've all been zapped by the fence.
Yeah.
So it's happening, and I had found a Slate article a few days ago that I just thought was like so amazing and had to be taken a look at, because I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I mean, I can stop. I think about a lot of stuff, but like it keeps coming back to my mind because I used to read Slate every day. I was
back when you were an anarchist punk.
Not when I was an anarchist punk. No, after I was, in my early 30s, just being a good liberal. I also read the New York Times and I read Slate. And Slate, publishes things in favor of, the proper use of transgender pronouns and respect for transgender people, which is gorgeous and wonderful. And so, like, very, liberally minded things. And back in the day, at least as I recalled, they were excited about things like the
G20 protests.
G20 protests and I don't know how long ago I was reading it. Maybe I'm confusing it with Salon also. But anyways, they, and certainly I feel like they've run articles in favor of like defund the police and things like this.
On the brutality of police and on the
yes,
like overwhelming surveillance state that we live under and the overreach of power and such and such.
Yes. So then I like to read a wide variety of publications from a wide variety of political standpoints to sort of try to glean some idea of what the fuck is going on. So I read this article called "The Freedom Convoy Was Never Just a Protest. It's an Armed Occupation of a G7 Capital." It's by Regina Bateson from February 17th, 2022. And it seems that the author lives in Ottawa, and she describes the red zone of downtown occupied Ottawa, which I guess I don't know that it is anymore. I guess the police kicked them out. She talks about how the truckers set up a hot tub, kitchen, entertainment, and, we're basically having a big party in this zone every night. Then the article goes on to say, talking about how the convoy in some ways acts like a militia. There's flag-draped pickups that rove around town, and there's scouts doing surveillance work around the perimeters of the thing. And this says intimidating residents, which I don't know. She doesn't substantiate that. And then signs and banners demarcate the occupied territory. Some 400 hate incidents have been reported. And among the Canadian flags on hockey sticks, there's Nazi imagery and a kaleidoscope of flags associated with extremist movements, including at times Confederate flags. So this sentence is particularly interesting because there's two links in this sentence, one for the 400 hate incidents and one for the kaleidoscope of flags. And when you click on the 400 hate incidents, it takes you to CBC News Ottawa. And in this article, you would think that if there were hate incidents, that it would tell you what the hate incidents were. If there were, people being harassed with hateful language, if there were people being beat up. But it just says that the Ottawa police says there's 126 criminal investigations underway and more than 400 hate incidents have been reported to the hotline, while 25 arrests have been made connected to the protest. So then I just keep reading, like, what are the hate incidents? I could not find any description of the hate incidents, and when I searched, maybe my Google foo is not what it used to be, given that Google is no longer what it used to be. I could not find any information about the 400 hate incidents. So perhaps there are grievous, terrible ones, and maybe folks can let me know. That would be interesting to know. And perhaps, I don't know, perhaps it's not, I have no idea what it is, but they're also talking about, there's another link to the kaleidoscope of flags that the author was talking about, and it links again to an article from CBC News. So CBC is the Canadian Broadcasting Company. It is a state-run news source.
It's like the BBC.
It's like the BBC, and it's like whatever Russia state news. Like, okay, so we're linking this up directly to the state's own broadcasting network, the state which is being protested. We're going to go to their articles as a source of information about the protest. Got it. Okay. So this links to an article talking about the different flags on display. And it says, for experts who study extremism in Canada, the symbol on some of these flags are familiar. Here's what some of them mean. It starts with the Gadsden flag, which is the Don't Tread on Me snake from the American Revolution, which I guess was also used by the Tea Party, and some people find it offensive because I guess it's sort of protesting federal power. So it was being used in a Canadian protest, which is interesting, but I guess Canada and the US have a lot of cultural heritage. Yeah, so Don't Tread on Me. That's an extremist flag. I thought it was a flag just connected with the beautiful impulses of the early American Revolution, not to be super taxed by the British, but apparently it's an extremist flag. It's used by libertarians who are also apparently some form of extremist. Okay, going on. So, and the Tea Party. I guess the main thing is this article is considering the Tea Party to be extremists, who I remember were making up a goodly portion of the Occupy protests. And as I recall, what they seemed to want was the same as a lot of what the anarchists wanted, was much less government control. And anyways, going on, the other extremist flags mentioned are a Molan Labe flag. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It seems to be spelled out in Greek. And apparently it's associated with gun rights. So it means Molan Labe are Greek for come and take them. So like, I have my guns, come at me, bro. So I guess it's also extremist to want the Second Amendment rights, apparently. Okay, so just going on. Then there's other flags being shown that are associated with the separatist movement in Quebec. again, apparently an extremist movement, because to desire sovereign territory for like your language group is just so extreme, so crazy.
Yeah, such an asshole move.
Patriot, okay. Canadian flag upside down. Flying a nation's flag upside down, it says, is generally meant to convey a distress signal or a sign of extreme danger to life. And federal rules say that the flag should never be taken down, upside down, burned as an effigy, or marked, among other things. Protesters have used the upside-down Canadian flag at pandemic-related protests since the first months of the lockdown. Could that be because they felt they were in extreme distress?
Right.
Could that be that they felt that their country was being taken over by interests that were not related to their own? Again, this article is calling that an extremist sentiment. So this particular article, published by the CBC, does not mention Confederate flags or Nazi flags, which I feel like is strange because it certainly would be in their interest in persuading the public about the grievousness of these protests to show the protests using the Confederate flags or the Nazi flags. So I haven't been able to personally find pictures of this. Perhaps they absolutely are there, but just saying, interesting. Yeah. These are the extremist flags, are like the Tea Party, Don't Tread on Me, the Quebec independence, the
right to bear arms.
The right to bear arms, and the upside down distress signal flag. Right. I don't know. I am personally unbothered by these. I feel like these are things. So anyways. Oh, the Slate article. Oh my God. I can't even keep reading it. Basically, after making these, what I perceive to be slanderous and inflated and unsubstantiated claims about the horrible, racist, extremist nature of this protest, or at least not what I consider to be, but what her own article could not give actual substantive information to support, just linked to the Canadian Broadcasting Network as an authority. Okay, so then the article proceeds to talk about how the author's brave friends organized a neighborhood counter-protest to protest their sleep being disturbed and themselves being inconvenienced by the trucker protest. And she talks about how they put their bodies on the line to stop the truckers. And I just thought that this was such a strange rhetorical move, was to suddenly slip into the language of the romance of protesting and standing up to the powerful in the context of downtown Ottawa residents feeling inconvenienced. And I thought ironic, because we have the Sleepover podcast, literally their sleep disturbed, right. Their sleepful slumber of letting all of their liberties be taken away disturbed.
Totally, yes.
And, and apparently the counter-protest succeeded in stopping the truckers for some hours, and then they made them take down all of their upside-down Canada flags and eventually let them on their way because they needed to get back for Netflix and chill. and their sleep that they had been missing.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to super downplay the inconvenience to the citizens of Ottawa of this protest. I'm sure it's very disrupting to daily life and very unpleasant to have a bunch of rowdy people that you don't know all up in your neighborhood, and who the heck knows what their mental health is and what's going on with them. And I just think that, it's not, I mean, your prime minister brought that upon you with these.
Yeah, it's hard to have, I can't remember if we were talking about this in a previous episode or whatever, but I often think about, here in the hyper-industrialized Alexa, smartphone, super virtual reality Western Hemisphere, like, we are the capital of the Hunger Games, Pan Am, global capitalist plan. Like, it's very difficult for me personally to start feeling real sad and sorry for the residents of the capital having their sleep disturbed.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then another thing was that it's an occupation of a G7 capital. And
Slate has previously been in cool, supportive, thumbs up mode about the occupation of a G7 city.
yes. And I just thought it was so wild that was the subtitle, as if like what I should be most concerned about is the G7. Oh no, the G7 is being threatened, is being occupied? You mean the incredibly rich leaders who own everything are being bothered with a confrontation? I was just like,
right, I know, yeah.
Whoa,
Let's protect them. Let's all rally around.
They're our
the
greatest
gods.
friends.
They provide us with all of our Prime Delivery Day stuff, Carolyn.
And I mean, so like one thing that the author did get right is like, yeah, and I think it is not just a protest, or I guess it was not. I guess it's been essentially taken down in Canada, but I do agree, there's an insurrectionary element in it that's just like, we're not taking this anymore. And that the author makes the point that the trucks, you know, are like weapons. Certainly you can kill people running them over with a big rig, and somewhat like tanks, and, you know, absolutely, that's the truth.
They're an occupying force for sure. People can sleep in them. People can live from them. They're like little mobile, fortresses.
Yeah. So I just felt that this article had to be discussed because this kind of writing, like, I know is being read by people similar to myself, people, you know, whatever, getting doctorates in English departments, people who
care deeply about the plight of the world.
Who really want people of all genders to be respected and people of all races to be respected, who want to see a government that effectively helps people with healthcare and everything. And so it's just like, I'm thinking of like my previous colleagues in the English department who I know read this kind of stuff and are still like really pleased to be reading just that, and and just thinking like, I sure hope their rhetorical education is clicking in their brains to the exact amount of fuckery that, like, this is not recognizable to the liberalism of my teens or 20s. This is not, or leftism, I should at least say. I mean, I hung out with people who were, I mean, there were people in my English department who were super into Marxist ideas. They, like, were not excited by the oppression of worker-driven protests. Like, this is literally a protest of working people, or an insurrection, whatever we want to call it, wanting more
rights for themselves.
So, like, leftism back in the day seemed to be about that.
Right.
Like, and apparently it really, really, really no longer is.
Yeah. Well, only certain cool worker class people.
Yes. Yeah. So, it just continues to sort of like dazzle me. I mean, maybe I don't know what, I guess I just think about this a lot, I guess. Thank you for listening to my recovering liberal story. I feel like I'm like a Mormon who like got out.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I used to watch the Colbert Show like every day, and I so badly wanted Trump to be convicted on, you know, collusion with Russia, because I just wanted his gross orange face and his rapery vibes like out of my field of consciousness. And so I was really with Steve Colbert, who was just like gleefully reporting all the time about revelations in the Mueller case. And then the Mueller papers actually came out and they found nothing. The independent investigator found nothing. And then it's recently been announced. This is
and I don't know why this isn't more of a big deal. This is exactly the same as Watergate, that the Clintons, and I guess apparently Biden, from what I've heard, funded spying on Trump. And one of the ways that they did this was a lawyer who worked for the Clintons went to the FBI saying, I have dirt on Trump colluding with the Russians. I don't work for anybody. I'm just a concerned citizen. Lied about his connections with the Clintons to the FBI, got the FBI started in on their hunt around Trump, and has just admitted that he lied and he worked for the Clintons and he was paid by the Clintons. And I'm just like, what? Why does nobody... I mean, I know why nobody gives a fuck, because everything is so overwhelming and weird now. But this is a big deal. This is... So anyways, it's just kind of astounding for me that, like, actually all of this story that I was so desperately wanted to be true about nasty Trump colluded with the Russians, and I was so disappointed when the Mueller report found nothing, and I was disappointed right along with Stephen Colbert. It is just kind of mind-blowing for me to realize that, like, all of that story was fabricated by the Clintons, that no evidence has been found to say that that happened, that they were spying on Trump, and they were slandering him in this way that dominated the mainstream media and the late night comedy shows, and, throttled the attention of good liberals like me who wanted the dirty bad man gone. And just like how in depth that was, and how what a purely self-interested play by the Clintons that was.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it just keeps getting, like, more and more intense. It's like my foundational beliefs are still the same. I still want all people to be respected. I want a world where resources are shared and corporations aren't people with the rights of people. I want a world, where there's, like, local sovereignty, and there's not, like, people with jackboots and machine guns coming in when you're praying for peace in a big circle. I want a world where you can trade clothes at an anarchist picnic without money. I mean, think about that. Like, that's got me, I mean, for a long time, still now, that got me thinking so much about money and the money system. And the way that, like, because those experiences taught me that they are threatened by people engaging without the use of money, with just the generosity in their hearts, or their trading or whatever, not allowed.
Not fucking cool.
The money must change hands. The money must be taxed. The only currency of the land is the currency that we control. Since we control the currency, we can shut you out of our system at any time. And if you try to live on the fringes of this system, as many of the rainbow travelers do, and as many of the anarchists I was hanging out with do, you try to live on the fringes, just because we have a super bounteous society and everybody has way more clothes than they use, and lots of people have food in their pantry that they can share. If you try to simply live on the generosity of the good humans around you, who like your free spirit and are willing to, give you whatever, we will come and break it up or intimidate you with guns. I mean, it's like, that's so mind-blowing to me, that is considered a really intense form of protest by these forces that are so scared of sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so sorry when I think about what kind of kindergarten they went to, like,
It's a really weird kindergarten that we all live in right now. That's for sure. It's a really weird kindergarten.
Yeah. So anyways, all of which is to say, this is why my sympathies are...
I think what's upsetting you about the Slate article, Carolyn, is that you have read the same kind of authors talk about the bravery of people who challenge the global world gang now writing articles being like, how dare they disrupt the gang territory of the worldwide gang? How dare they? And that dissonance is upsetting.
Yes.
Like, there's definitely some kind of, like, sour grapes or, like, some kind of, like, judgment in the fact that, like, oh, because it could... Anyway, it has to do with some, like, ideas about nonviolence. It has to do... I'm sure that, like, the sentiment is around, like, well, these aren't just people walking around. These are people in trucks that could be deadly weapons. But, like, a truck isn't a tank. A truck isn't a, like, you know, military occupation. It's not. And the gang that these trucks are threatening absolutely use tanks and bombs and fucking aircraft carrier warships to enforce their reality tunnel on everyone, and suddenly they're the fucking poor, weak, sad victims of this, like, evil, scary truck convoy. Like, it doesn't compute. It doesn't compute.
It's, like, so, like, obviously messed up. So thank you, Layla. Thank you for hearing my liberal recovery pain.
Well, it just really highlights how, you know, it really highlights the ways in which our brains have, like, the public discourse is so simplified and polarized, and it's like, guys in trucks bad, guys in trucks racist, guys in trucks stupid. You know, like, that's just, you can just say that and people will just be like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, that must be, they must just be senselessly doing this stupid random act of utter violence. And, like, that, because it fits in the reality tunnel of that very simplified reality, but that's not, it's just not true. It's just not what's happening. It's not what's going on. And it's
just
like,
not true.
And it's mean. It's mean-spirited.
Yeah, and I just, to conclude on a spiritual note, I feel like a lot of what has been able to, like, let me perceive things the way that I do has been the study of Hermeticism, which can be a pretty brainy pursuit. It's not like folk magic or anything. It's like, all right, here's these giant books on Hellenic astrology. Here's this pile of books on the tarot. Here's this pile of books on the Kabbalah. Here's this pile of books on ceremonial magic and alchemy. Figure it out.
Put it all together.
Put it all together. And when you put it all together, what you realize is, okay, the Kabbalah is a mandala. The Thema Mundi of Hellenic astrology is a mandala. The tarot deck is a mandala. They are mandalas that were overlaid on each other in a pretty genius way by Eliphas Levi, that was later evolved by the Golden Dawn and Crowley. And they're mandalas that if you sit and contemplate them in a sort of jnana yoga sort of way, I don't know how to pronounce Sanskrit, gnosis, intellectual gnosis, yoga kind of way, your linear brain melts quite psychedelically, but it's a lasting psychedelic melt because you really start to see how deeply the opposites are in relationship with each other and how alchemy and evolution happens through the unification of opposites, the solve and the coagula, the formation of the new, which, you know, also the observation of nature. Everything points to that. And it starts to be, when you apply that to the field of, like, human thought, you know, you start to see how every thesis has its antithesis and resolves in a new synthesis. And it just becomes, it's sort of like a wonderful inoculation, a wonderful vaccine against these very unbalanced takes on what's going on that are verbally done. And I also find it so interesting in connection with this, you know, like Plato in I forget which dialogue it was, I think the Phaedrus. In the Phaedrus, Plato's Socrates, refers to the written word as a pharmakon, which can be, which means medicine in Greek, and so it can heal you or it can hurt you. It's a drug. And in the text, Socrates is concerned that, the written word just doesn't carry the ethos of an actual person, doesn't carry the same immediacy as written speech, and that the sophists are abusing the written word to persuade people of things that aren't true. And philosophy, of course, is the love of truth, the love of wisdom. And I've just always carried that really deep within my heart. And now more than ever, it seems to me that people are fucking tripping on the written word and not the good shit. Like, the good shit is like real poetry, real mantra, real incantation and praises of beauty. And that's not what people are tripping on. That opens your mind and heart in a beautiful way and takes you to a heavenly place. I highly endorse the contemplation of poetry and ritual, but prayer. But people are tripping on the most twisted, like, weirdo arguments.
Well, it's so interesting. Like, we started out talking before we got on the podcast about Gurdjieff's criticism of the modern obsession with the literary form of journalism, and how, like, journalism is as much a kind of literature as poetry is, as fiction is, as anything is. Like, it's literature. It's something that people write. It's a pharmakon. And the most dangerous thing about it is that people, like, one of the, rules of journalism is that you have to pretend that what you're writing is reality. Mm-hmm. So every time you read a journalistic thing, you are, like, reading it through a lens where you believe that it's true on some level. It's, like, purporting to be factual, but therefore it's, like, persuasive, literary, world-creating, whatever, is, like, all the more powerful. Because, like, when you read a fiction, you're reading it through the lens of, like, well, it's a fiction, so, like, it's not happening. So its effects are different on you. The medicine's effects are different because it's got this buffer on it of, like, this is fiction. But the literary form and the medicine of journalism has no fucking buffer on it because it's part of its shtick is to purport that it's true.
Right.
But it's absolutely not. Because it's all filtered through whatever the fuck the person who's writing it, the author, wants to put across as a story because it's literature.
Absolutely. And lately, as I've been, like, studying hypnosis, it's really become apparent to me how very susceptible the human mind is to hypnosis through language. And I do feel like there is just, like, a hypnotism that people get into. And so all I would say is, spend some more time reading beautiful thoughts, thinking beautiful thoughts, contemplating mandalas and images of the whole in various ways, everybody, to whatever extent you can, like, let's cleanse ourselves of these really contracted unbalances.
Yeah, get in touch with deeper stories.
Deeper stories, more beautiful stories. Yeah. Well, thank you for listening, everybody. If you like what you're listening to, please do leave us a rating or some reviews. Tell your friends. We'll tune in with you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.